Hello, everyone. I am Daisy Huang, Senior Vice President of Sales and Customer Success at Catalan.
Hi, everybody. My name is Angeline Gavino, and I'm the Vice President of Customer Success at Catalan. Welcome to the Women in Tech podcast, your go-to space for celebrating the remarkable achievements, stories, and insights of extraordinary women in the ever-evolving world of technology.
Each episode is a journey into the lives of these amazing women, where we uncover the stories, triumphs, and wisdom they've gained along their unique path.
So, buckle up for an intimate conversation as we delve into the incredible stories of our outstanding guests. Hi, everybody. My name is Angeline. Welcome to another empowering episode of Women in Tech by Catalan. I'm super excited to be talking to our well-esteemed guest speaker today. She's a seasoned professional with over 2 decades of experience in the technology industry. She is a well-known thought leader in the quality and software engineering space and is deeply committed to fostering diversity and inclusion in the industry. She's a fellow of the British Computer Society and the Women's Engineering Society. Her contributions have earned her prestigious accolades, including being listed in the UK Tech 50 long list and the Computer Weekly Most Influential Women in UK Tech. Welcome to the podcast, Nicola Martin.
Hi, lovely to meet you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to get that introduction right because I feel like it's just a great way to set the stage for today's topic, which is stepping into the limelight, roadmap to recognition. And you are the epitome of a woman stepping into the limelight in such a male-dominated field. And I'm looking forward to delving into your journey and experiences to hopefully help women in the testing space listening to us today uncover the roadmap to recognition. So let's kick things off. Let's start with how you got into the testing field. Have you always wanted to be in this space? Walk us through your journey.
I actually started out not having any idea about what I wanted to do in tech anyway. I initially started out wanting to be an astronomer. So I got partial degree in astronomy and planetary science, which I will one day finish. But I ended up going into work, just family and everything else. So I ended up going into work. And I was actually a conference organizer for many years and worked for a quite large organization doing events, national and international, working with, on events to do with heads of state visiting, delegations, government. It was, quite high profile for somebody very, very young. I was maybe 18, 19 at the time when I started working for them. So, and then beyond that, I went into marketing and worked in that field for a little bit, but then ended up in my first, what would be a tech role. I wasn't entirely sure what I was doing, but I got mentored along the way. And that's how I discovered about software testing, the short version of it. I found out about what I was doing and I realized that it was an actual role or job and there was an actual industry attached to it as well. So I ended up moving into testing with lots of encouragement and advice from people I worked with at the time.
That's awesome. From wanting to be an astronomer, conference organizer, marketing, and then software testing, such diverse background.
All over. Yeah, I've done lots of things, worked in loads of industries. So my CV is very, very varied.
So amazing. Well, let's talk a little bit about your foray into the software testing world, right? When you got started. How did you grow into the role? Like, how did you progress? How does your career look like as you grew into, the testing industry space?
So a big part of the role I was doing, which I hadn't realized when I first started, but as I stayed in the role for a year or so or more, I realized I was doing specific tasks with my job of supporting a large team of engineers, business analysts. We had system administrators for the support side, and we also had systems architect as well. And in fact, one of the systems architects was my mentor, helping me to look at career paths and things like that. And as we were working, we were looking through the things I was doing day to day within my role. And they actually said to me, well, do you realize a lot of what you're doing is analytical? So you're leaning towards business analysis, and you're also leaning towards testing, because we built software internally for our teams to use. And before they went out to the different teams that were using it, I would actually do testing. And at the time, I didn't realize that's what I was doing. I just thought I was just doing a checklist of things to make sure it was correct before it went out. And, the teams beyond that were actually doing user acceptance. And so what I was doing didn't really have a phase or a title, but I was doing these levels of checks and reporting bugs back to the developers and letting them know where there were issues that needed to be fixed before the delivery went out. And then we realized that I was actually doing majority of my role at some point became testing. So, I was more then inclined to think about a career in that field beyond working at Glaxo Wellcome at the time. And then thinking about doing certification. So I did that. And then from then on, I never really looked back. And the next, few roles I did were testing right up to team lead. So, yeah.
Amazing. What's the number one challenge you've faced as you navigated your way in the industry, as you grew into the role within the software testing space?
So the initial problems I found, because I started doing testing in the early noughties, and the initial problems I found were that companies at the time were making people redundant quite regularly. And there was a big move towards using offshore companies, and which was fine because work went through phases of onshore, offshore, onshore, offshore. It was fine because you'd always actually find a job quite quickly at that time. But it made me feel as if, my goodness, this industry, tech, is not as solid as some of the other industries I'd worked in. And you could potentially be out of work quite quickly. So you need to, I needed to really think about fairly early on whether I wanted to stay permanent or not. And I think about 4 or 5 years in, I decided to go contract because I wanted to be able to have more control over who I worked with. And I didn't want to be in another permanent role where I maybe worked on the same system or project for 2 years. I wanted to be able to have the ability to move around and to be a bit more selective about projects I worked on. And so that was for me a big decision. And it was triggered because I was in a permanent role where I found out that someone in my team was being paid £10,000 more a year than me. And it caused me to have such an internal fight, about whether I love the job, but am I going to stay and, have this company take liberties with me, or am I going to control my career, choose where I want to apply to work, go for projects that are more interesting, and just have a bit more control and steer over it? And that's why I chose to contract for a while, except a while turned into 10 or 11 years. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And I know I've listed a lot of your awards at the beginning. A few things that you've accomplished throughout the years. How did you go from, that feeling of uncertainty that you were talking about in the beginning to really like finding the paths that you wanted to be in and taking control of your career, and then really being well known and achieving all of these awards and really amplifying your voice in the industry?
Mm-hmm. Well, when I was contracting, I wasn't interested in any of that. I had a very different driver for wanting to contract. It was all about being on interesting projects, meeting new people, and not being stuck in the same project for years and years, but having the ability, even within the companies I was working for, the clients I had, being able to move to different projects if that was possible. And so I didn't have the same drive towards the things I do now that I had then. I did a bit of volunteering during that time. I was a UN online volunteer for a while. I worked on websites. I was project managing. I did a bit of business analysis for different projects at the time. But that UN Online Volunteers was the only real volunteering I was doing during that period. I was very driven by the fact that the day rates were fantastic. And also, I could stop working for certain amounts of time if I wanted to. And I could go away and, I could do much more things with my life than I could do if I was in permanent work. So I really enjoyed the time and I learned a lot and I was able to pick up lots of skills whilst I was working. And, just being able to move up the ladder and across the ladder, sometimes not necessarily up, just across, but, being able to pick very consciously the roles I was going for was extremely important to me. And it wasn't about awards and anything else at that point.
Right. What was the first award or achievement that you've ever had? And do you remember how you felt when that happened?
Yeah, I think when I started to volunteer for the BCS, obviously we're talking about when I became a bit more prominent.
Right.
That was not my intention. So when I joined BCS as a member, maybe nearly 20 years ago, and I wasn't doing as much as I possibly wanted to do. But later on, obviously after I contracted and I went back to permanent work, I felt that I needed to do more to give back. And I decided that I would become maybe a more active member, and I joined the SIGIST committee, the BCS SIGIST committee, special interest group in software testing. Everyone has not heard of us. And that was just a very spur of the moment thing. In fact, I was on a train going home and I called in for their annual general meeting. And they had a role available and I decided to go for it because it was actually something I was interested in. It was inclusion. And I was really interested in that and wanting to see what else I could do to maybe move the needle for software testing and for just quality and test teams in general. And I did that and really loved it. And that's where my, profile started to build. And about maybe a year or so after I joined SIGIST, I think I joined BCS Women as well. And with that group as well, you obviously get another level of interest in you, which I wasn't really aware of or prepared for, I don't think. So around 2021, that was when I was first nominated for Computer Weekly Most Influential Woman in UK Tech Awards. So that has a long list. And I think at the time there were maybe 500 people on it that year. And then within that, also being on the long list, you have a top 50. So I didn't make the top 50, but I did make Rising Stars. And beyond that, it's just skyrocketed. And I think I'm quite, surprisingly, I'm quite shy person. I don't know if I would say that. Introvert, maybe introvert, extrovert, I would say. And it was very overwhelming at first because I had a lot of attention, a lot of requests to speak where I'd only done small events before. And it's just gone on from there. So there's been lots of nominations, wins, and it's been quite good.
Amazing. It's really amazing the trajectory of your career as well. I think this is a good segue, right, into the topic itself. Let's talk a little bit about recognition. How important is recognition, particularly for women in the workplace?
I think we're in a very different time. So during the lockdowns, when obviously I started to get recognition because there was more opportunity to speak. I think the conferences and things before and events before had been very much, especially in testing, and I will say this in software testing, it was a huge drive towards only picking people who were well known to speak. And that meant that other voices were not being heard. You might know a person through a person that you worked with or something like that, but you were not seeing that, level of new faces until we were in lockdown and events had to happen online. And then we had much more variation. It was amazing to see, really, because you'd hear voices you'd never heard before on subjects that were really interesting. And it was great to see different points of view, not just the status quo that we were being constantly fed in our area of, work. And so, it was really interesting for me to see that. And that's really when I started to see my own profile, rise. And so it's very important, I think, for women to be able to have a platform and be able to speak. And not everyone's happy or confident enough to do the bigger events, but being able to do the small events is really great, that we still have that opportunity. And even beyond the, being, locked down, we still have online events and the ability for people to take part who may not have had that experience. So especially for us in SIGIST, for example, we encourage new speakers, people who've never spoken before. And we always encourage everyone to apply, and everyone's got an equal chance of getting in. And we try to make it as balanced a speaking, agenda, if you like, as we can, so everybody potentially can see someone like them on the panels and on the speaking at the events.
Right. I like how you're advocating, right, for the small voices. There's really, what you're saying here is there's no small voice. Everybody has a space in the stage. Really, we can share the stage together. And I did also realize in what you're saying that it comes with the opportunity being present. And we know that in this space, I mentioned earlier, very male-dominated industry, it's hard for women to get that recognition, to get that opportunity. Have you struggled? Have you seen that? Have you seen the struggle in your journey? Having to compete with the other sex, or our male counterparts, basically.
I think the as I say, the environment's kind of changed. So you're more likely to be working in environments that are more agile. You're definitely closer to developers than we're closer to developers now than we've ever been. If you're in a test team, I think it's I think I've seen a lot of people talking about kind of the things that are related to toxicity and connecting it with conferences and events and things that have been happening in software testing, but in development and also in engineering more widely. I've obviously seen those conversations. I think there was a whole event last year where they advertised with fake speakers, women speakers. And, that was like mind-blowing to me. There are so many women who are willing and able to speak, but the events don't want to pay you, which is obviously an issue. And you should be paid for your time, essentially. And that's an issue. But for people who are just starting out, they may not be looking to get paid. They might be just looking to be, to have that first opportunity to speak. And we should be able to work with those people to give them whatever training or support or help they need to frame their talk and their submission for a talk. And then, obviously, if they get picked, being able to support them. And I think larger events need to consider that as well as part of their offering, because one, they get more people wanting to attend. And I think if we did that, there are so many women who are willing to speak and want to speak at events and larger conferences. They're just not getting the opportunity to do that.
That's true. And really, right, the more diverse the lineup for, let's say, what we're talking about, right, in a conference, the more we're able to really reach out to, the different members of the community who can relate to the diversity and the different voices that they bring into the limelight. And though I agree with you, it's so important to give a chance for everybody to have that first experience, to have that first opportunity. And I know that a lot in the industry, women in the industry sees you as a great role model with what you have accomplished so far in your career. And as I mentioned earlier, how you were really able to amplify your voice and, be able to speak to not just, testing in general, but also diversity and inclusion. How, what is your advice for women who want uh, to, to be in the same path as you are? If somebody asks you, how do I get to where you are today? What would you tell them?
I think it's really important. The skills you need now are very different to what I needed. I tell people all the time, when I first started in tech, you could walk out of a job on a Friday and walk into one on a Monday. It's a very different landscape now. I think the things that are really important, it's not necessarily about being prominent. It's about having a really good network of people around you who can advise. It seems cliched after so many years of hearing it, but having a mentor is really important. If that's what you need at that point to help you understand where you need to be focused in terms of your career trajectory, I think that's really important. And just the whole thing around about your community, really keep connected to community, keep an ear to the ground about what's happening in industry and what changes are occurring, because we know that these changes are happening at lightning speed now. We need to really make sure that our skill sets we can't keep up with absolutely everything, but make sure that you know about the main things that are happening in the industry and making sure that your skills align. And if there are companies that you want to work with in particular, understand if it's available publicly, what their frameworks are, how they work, if they have quality teams, if they are, encouraging testing and amongst everyone within the engineering teams, or they have a specific test team that they use. Understand the industry and the area that you want to go into and have those skills at the ready, basically. Mm-hmm. And be confident in talking about them.
Right. I love how you always highlight, the importance of your mentor. And even in the beginning, when you talk about, first really getting into the technology industry, that you had this mentor who has really helped you. And I know that, and even I myself, and I was starting, one of the questions I have is, how do you go about finding a mentor?
So there are different ways. Obviously, being a member of the BCS, it's quite easy for us to put out there that we're looking for somebody. Now, I will say, when you're earlier in career, I feel it's easier to find a mentor. When you're mid to late career, it's harder to find a mentor. I would say that just because there are less people able to help you at that level. But I think that it's very much about whether or not you're a member of society, for example, where they may offer you help with mentorship. BCS, for example, has a whole platform just for mentorship. It's separate to everything else. And whether or not you follow different groups in, say, the women in tech space, where they have, I know some in particular that have mentorship kind of programs, I guess, but some of them run continually throughout the year, and some of them are for a short amount of time. And there are other organizations, tech related or engineering related, that have, their own programs for mentorship.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And also, you mentioned, right, having a community, having a network. When we really think about it, for women, it's really hard to put yourself out there in a lot of ways. But then also with the day-to-day, the responsibilities that we have, everyday responsibilities, not just within the workplace, but outside the workplace. How did you find time, and how did you start connecting with your community and having that network of people that will surround you and really help you grow?
When I was a contractor, I always thought that networking was really important. But I didn't see any of my colleagues doing that. So I used to join different business groups and network that way. And I never used to meet people who did software testing when I networked. I just met people who did random things, not necessarily tech at all. But then as we've now, come through these years and out the other side of everything that's happened in recent years, I think it's become more and more important for people to find community and to understand in their area of expertise who are the people who are really, making waves and trying to connect and make a bigger, a group of not just colleagues, but friends and people you could turn to for advice when, things are not at their best in terms of your career. I still say that people should try and join groups. There are tons of groups in the women in tech space that you can get involved in, or even if you don't have the time to volunteer, just, attend events if you can. As I say, that's not for everyone. For me personally, I have a child and, it's quite hard to attend events in person when you have when you have children, for example, because you obviously need to consider, is it an evening event? Do I need to find babysitter? All of that stuff.
Right.
But if you can, because there's the ability to do things online, if there are events happening online, attend them. If there are speed networking events, and if you're able to attend events in person, find things within your area of interest that you can, maybe apply to your work, or if it's conferences, make that a conversation happen with your managers so that you could maybe get that in your budget so that you can attend in person. That's always an important thing.
Right. Well, I agree. Like you said earlier, right? We live in a different world right now, and events can happen both online, offline, or in person, like you mentioned. And I feel the pain in a lot of ways. So I can relate to what you said, not just about, having a kid, having a child, but also what you said earlier, being an introvert. Like, it's very hard to get yourself out there and really network. But I think what we're trying to say to the audience here is that, if you want to put yourself out there, if you want to, I suppose this is the path that you want to take to be more well-known in the industry and get a chance to share your voice to a larger group, networking will really play a part in getting you there and getting the recognition and the opportunity that you need. And in a lot of ways, not just as a channel for you to get more exposure, but then also just to learn from these other people that you surround yourself with. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Let's step this up a notch for women in particular, right? Not just in technology, but really everywhere. And I can attest to this personally. With recognition comes that feeling of self-doubt, which is so contrary, right? Like, let's talk about imposter syndrome a little bit. Where do you feel this negative self-talk and feelings of inadequacy come from?
It can happen at any time to anyone. I was speaking to a group of 300 students a few weeks ago, and they had lots of questions about imposter syndrome. And that was simply people coming to the end of their degrees and thinking about going into the world of work, and especially into tech, and thinking that they wouldn't be good enough. And that, this is where their kind of imposter syndrome was coming in, and asking us asking us on the panel how they should deal with that. And I was so shocked to hear that from people who hadn't even started working yet. And then, within your career, it can happen simply from somebody giving you the opportunity to do something that will, highlight your role a little bit more. So maybe giving you a bit more responsibility within the job that you've currently got, but not necessarily a step up the ladder yet. And then you tend to get it where people have been given a brand new job to do and they're stepping into that role. And rather than feeling, I've got this and I'm super confident about my ability to do it, they doubt themselves. And it seems insane to somebody outside because clearly you've been chosen for a reason. And in fact, I've even heard it more recently from people who have just started brand new jobs. They've interviewed 6 times for a job and they have nailed it. They've managed to get it, and it's good salaries and everything else. And then they go in on the first, second day, they see everybody around them and they think, my gosh, how did I get here? And I'm never going to be able to do this job. And, I've had that conversation with people on different discussions. I've said, you have to remember, you've been through this process and you've smashed it. You've got in the door. That was the hardest part. And you have impressed them so much that they've given you this job because they know that you're the right person for that job. And, you've got to get out of that headspace of it's your fault. It's not your fault at all. This is just your self-doubt because you are the best person. They've given you this role. So go for it. And, you can achieve anything.
Mm-hmm. Right. Have you ever experienced imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I used to get it all the time when I contracted, simply because if I went from a long-term contract to something new, it was constantly this big energy that I needed to get the job, first of all, and then I needed to step into the role. And it could be quite different to what I'd been doing before. And so I would always feel this self-doubt little voice in my head, making me feel less than, a superhero, and it would be, quite, the doubt could get quite huge. And in fact, whilst I was contracting, I suffered with anxiety quite a lot, specifically when I worked in Canary Wharf for a long time, which is kind of like the city here in London. And I really, really felt sometimes that I was way out of my depth. And then there were other times where I'd be like, stop it, you're just being silly. And I would speak to people about that and they would just say, what is wrong with you? You're doing so well. Why do you feel like you're not good enough for this job? It's, crazy really why I felt that. But I would go through those moments, and I just advise everybody who might be in, or anyone who might be in that situation, speak to your colleagues and your friends. I promise you, they'll assure you that you're doing a great job. You've got no problems and everything's fine.
Yeah, I see what you mean, right? Like I said, it's quite contrary that you see someone being recognized, and I guess in a lot of ways, the reaction that comes in later, maybe not immediately, but at some point in time, is that, do I deserve this recognition? Like I feel like you started doubting yourself and your capability, but really you got the recognition, right? What we're talking about. So like you said, I think this goes back to having that community as well, like having the people to surround you that will help you in a lot of ways, as I mentioned earlier, including, removing that feelings of self-doubt as well. And, gaining that confidence about your own ability. And I think what makes it, to be honest, I think that is actually the hardest part, having that courage to talk to somebody that this is what you're feeling, because exactly what you said, it sounds so insane. Like, I just don't feel like I have the courage to talk to somebody about this. And so I wanted to dive a little bit into that, right? Like, what is, aside from like just, are there any other practical tips that you feel like women who are a little bit more hesitant or struggling to speak out or ask for help, what are other ways that they can try to overcome this feeling?
And again, as we've talked about having a mentor, I think if you're having real problems like that, I would suggest that the best thing to do is to start to speak to a mentor, or if your organization actually offers coaching in any capacity in by ways of support, then I would definitely consider coaching as something that somebody should utilize if they can. It's about understanding, really getting to the crux of what the issue is. Why do you think that you feel like that? Is it because you've been given a piece of work that you think you're not able to achieve? Is it because you see other people around you who may be more qualified than you? Is it because you don't feel you're being supported by your line manager or other people that you work with? And it can sometimes not. I will just say this: there's been this thing that's been happening in industry where I've been hearing that a lot of the time companies have been trying to push back on people and saying it's not us, it's you. But actually, I would state that if you have people who have imposter syndrome, and you have a number of people coming to managers and saying, I don't feel like I can do this, or I'm overwhelmed, or I don't think I'm good enough to do this, I would say you need to start to look at your culture within your teams, because that's usually a reason why people get imposter syndrome. So you have to look at the culture. Is there something about the way that we are working as a team, as an organization, as a department within an organization, that it's making people feel this way, overwhelmed and unable to, achieve what they have to achieve? And you need to support them in that case.
I totally agree with that because there must be a trigger, right? Something triggers these emotions. And I think for women especially, we always have that feeling that we're not good enough. Despite everything that we do, all the roles that we play in, that always resurfaces. And as you said, there's just a trigger in that. And especially in a workplace, it could be the culture.
Well, you know that there's this thing about, because we've talked about when people are going into a job, so that that there's this thing that says that there's a thing that I've read and heard many, many times about when people apply for roles. Something like a man will apply for a role if they only meet 30% of the job description, but a woman looks to, be absolutely perfect on every point on the job description, or at least 90% of it. Which means that that's another reason why you don't see so many women applying for roles, because they don't feel they're good enough from day one. So you have to look at, as a company, how you're presenting those job descriptions. Is it the language that's being used in there? Is it a level of bias that's being projected into those job descriptions? Because the language can be enough to put people off if you use specific words that are maybe seen as being too masculine. For example, they might, be off-putting to people, so they won't want to apply.
Right. I've read that a lot as well. And I didn't realize that until, at some point in my career as well, I did apply. And I'm like, yeah, I recognize that I also don't feel like I qualify for a job unless I exceed the expectations on the job description. So that's so on point. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I wanted to recap 3 key points that really resonated with me throughout, our conversation. So number 1, when you were recapping your journey, I think one of the things that I love about the trajectory and your journey was it started with a passion. Like you said a lot that you never really set out to do it this way. You discovered something you had a vision of what you want your career to be. And, you're passionate about it, and you just followed that passion, and it led you to where you are today and all these recognitions and all the communities that you serve. And I really love that. And I think that's something that will resonate with the audience. If you have the passion, right, you really can accomplish anything that you want. And then number 2, having a good network of people, surrounding yourself with people that will help you grow and help you learn is super important. And that, roadmap to getting that recognition. And really, it's all about self-improvement and learning from each other. Like they say, it takes a village, right? And so a couple of things you said: have a mentor, and then be connected to your community. And then lastly, when talking about imposter syndrome, right, there are a few things that you mentioned, including, remind yourself of your achievements. Whenever you have that self-doubt, remind yourself of how you got there, and the people that recognize that you fit the role and this is the right path for you. And you also mentioned, again, getting a mentor or a coach to, just help you overcome all of that. So I think one last question that I have for you today: is there any final advice or message that you'd like to leave with our audience?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think don't be so, we've talked about the awards and everything else that is the kind of what people now see as the recognition for doing the roles that we do. But don't be so focused on that. That's not necessarily needed. Those things, they happen and then they disappear and they're gone again. And, whilst you have them, they're not the most important things. Obviously, testing and the area that we work in, if you're really good at it, what you'll be doing is building that community of people understanding what's happening within the community, joining community groups and getting involved in those, and helping as much as possible to keep quality and testing alive. They're the most important things that you can do with your career if this is the area that you want to stay in. And if you want to get involved in things that are happening in industry more widely, please support women in tech groups. There are loads of them, and they are trying their best to survive in very difficult situations at the moment. So where you can give some of your time, please do consider that. And I think that's really important. If you have the opportunity to give back, because it will give you such a really strong sense of achievement. It's more than any awards will ever give you.
I love that. That's really amazing. And lastly, and I promise this is really the last question, what's next for you in your career journey, and where can our listeners find you and connect with you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, and then there's another link on my profile where you can find lots of things about me. I do lots of talks and panel discussions. Obviously, I'm doing this podcast. I've got a couple more podcasts coming up and some more talks in May. Beyond that, I will obviously do things like speaking at boot camps and other events. And yeah, I just do lots. So you'll see me pop up now and again. But, follow me on LinkedIn. That's the key place to find me. What's next for me? I don't know. So, at the moment, I'm open to opportunities and looking to see what's coming next. But I'm not worried at all, because I know I always land on my feet. So yeah, it's fine. And I think that everybody else, the industry is a bit, I'd say chaotic at the moment, but it does calm down. It's waves, and these things happen. I've been in industry for over 20 years, and honestly, it's just waves. It comes back and everything's fine and everything's good. But always be, I think, for everyone that's listening to this, I think the key thing is to always keep your skills up to date, always be aware of what's happening in industry, have the support that's around you. I know that some people don't like the idea of approaching people that you don't know on LinkedIn, but if you have people who know somebody who could potentially mentor you, don't be afraid to utilize your network to try and connect to somebody that you may not have a direct connection to for mentorship. Really, really important that you feel confident and that you're always ready for your next move.
Right. I love it. Thank you so much for being with us today, Nicola. It has been great learning more about you and your journey, and I've learned a lot in this discussion. And as we wrap up this inspiring episode of Women in Tech, we hope you've been as energized and motivated as we are. Nicola's journey has illuminated the path to recognition in the tech industry, reminding us of the power of passion and purpose. Thank you for tuning in to Women in Tech. Stay inspired, stay empowered, and until next time, keep breaking barriers and blazing trails.